Haloch yelechu b'cha noseh meshech hazorah yavo verina noseh alumotav kaverai nevarach Yehi Shem Adonai Baruch Me'etav Yerolam Bershut kaverai nevarach alinu shachanu mishalo Baruch alinu shachanu mishalo tuvo chayinu Baruch Baruch Shemo Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Hazan et ha'olam kulo b'tuvo b'chein b'chesed u'vrachamim U'noten lechem lechol basar ki le'olam chasto U'b'tuvo hagadol tamid lo chasar lanu ve'yachsar lanu mazon le'olam va'ed b'avo shemo hagadol Ki usan farnes lakol, metiv lakol, mechin mazon lechol briotav asher bara. Baruch atah Adonai hazan et hakol no delet. Elenu mechalam ha'el avinu malkeinu adirenu boreinu golenu yotzreinu kadoshenu kadosh Yaakov Arachamanu yishlachanu et Eliyahu hanavi Arachamanu Mikdal Yeshua Malcho v'Yosech Chesed Limshicho LeDavid u'Lezaro Ad Olam Oseh Shalom Eramav U'Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu ve'al Kol Yisrael ve'yimeru Amen Yirat Adonai Kedoshav Ki Yem Machsav Av Kipir Mashu V'Ra'evu V'Dor She'Adonai Loch Tukotov Hodu L'Adonai Kito Ki Le'olam Chasto Poteach Et Yadecha U'Maspi Alecho Charaton Baruch HaGever Shekar V'Adonai B'Haya Adonai Mivtacho Na'Ra'iti Gam Zakanti V'Lo Ra'iti Tzaddik Nezav Zarum Abakesh Lachem Zarum Abakesh Lachem Adonai Ozeamo Yiten Adonai Yivarach Et Amo V'Shalom Welcome, everyone. Welcome, friends. Jeremy Ben-Ami is a draw. Look at this. I'm so thrilled that we get to have this conversation now. And I want to invite up our beloved community member and longtime J Street supporter, Janet Halbert, to come and introduce Jeremy this afternoon.
Is this on? Okay. Around 14 years ago, I received an email from my older nephew, who was in college on the East Coast. He wrote, "Check this out. Your politics, your values." As a first-year student, he and his friends from Habonim Summer Camp, who goes to Habonim Summer Camp here, Habonim Summer Camp attended a J Street U organizing meeting. He thought I'd be interested in J Street, and he was right. J Street is my pro-peace, pro-Israel, pro-diplomacy, pro-democracy home, especially in challenging times. Based in Washington, D.C., with regional teams around the country, it was founded by today's speaker, my friend Jeremy Ben-Ami. Jeremy was offering a different voice and approach to what it means to be pro-Israel for Jewish Americans and our allies. I found a lot of people at IKAR either have no idea what J Street is, or they have opinions. What does J Street do? What should J Street do? What shouldn't J Street do? Imagine that, a lot of opinions here at IKAR. So I thought I would just take another minute to talk about what all the things that J Street does, because Jeremy and Rabbi Brous are not going to get to all of them today. So currently there are approximately 60 J Street U chapters on college campuses nationwide. They are the bravest. They are the bravest. Earlier this year, J Street U student leaders testified at a U.S. Senate hearing about anti-Semitism on campus. Next April, there's a national conference in D.C. I hope you'll join me there. There's also advocacy. Advocacy is exercising our First Amendment right to lobby and offer suggestions or opinions to our elected officials. Meetings occur on Capitol Hill and also in local district offices. J Street has a policy center. The policy center researches issues and issues briefing papers and offers webinars featuring subject matter expertise and analysis. You can sign up on the J Street website. You can check out J Street's policies, jstreet.org, or you can view previous webinars on J Street's YouTube page, which I just heard is now going to be moving to Substack, so check them both out. Jeremy has a great Substack page as well. There's a clergy cabinet with over 1,000 rabbis, cantors, and clergy students who support J Street's mission. And there's also political activism. For those of you who want to support federal candidates endorsed by J Street, there's a political action committee. This is not a solicitation. In the 2023-24 cycle, J Street PAC raised nearly $15 million for federal incumbents and challengers, including $6 million for the presidential race. So meet me later if you want to talk about getting involved in the PAC. Through the J Street Education Fund, there's travel to the region for members of Congress and key staff. Several years ago, I participated in a CODEL, a shortcut for congressional delegation, and it was not just a trip to Israel and the occupied territories. It was a high-level experience with meetings and discussions about the history of Israel-Palestine, U.S. foreign policy, and facts on the ground. My trip included meeting with then U.S. Ambassador Dan Shapiro. We also met with USAID administrators as well as civil society organizations. Like a lot of you, I've traveled to Israel many times, and I have close relatives in Israel as well. My trip with J Street and Jeremy and 5 members of the House of Representatives was profound. In some ways, it broke my heart, and at the same time, it steeled my resolve to keep working to achieve peace in the region. Many say we need a two-state solution for Israelis and Palestinians. Our speaker says we need a 23-state solution for the region. So now I'm going to turn over the conversation to Rabbi Brous and Jeremy. And just a few sentences about Jeremy. Jeremy has extensive experience in American politics, coupled with a deep love for the state of Israel. His grandparents were among the founders of Tel Aviv. He's an extraordinary strategist and visionary who saw a need and founded J Street 17 years ago. Jeremy is truly using his voice for good, and he exemplifies these words from Tehillim, Psalm 34. Seek peace and pursue it.
Thank you, Janet. Welcome, Jeremy. Thank you so much, Janet. I want to just say before we turn it over to Jeremy for some comments, I'm so thrilled that you're all here. And we also have many colleagues, many rabbinic colleagues who are in the room with us today. And aside from all of the rabbis who usually hang out at IKAR, I want to welcome Rabbi Laura Geller, who I saw a moment ago, Rabbi Michelle Masagia, and Rabbi John Rosov, who was one of the early supporters of J Street. And if there are other colleagues, please, if you'll just stand up for a second so that we can welcome you. You can, hello, welcome. That was a very meager welcome. Please, rabbis, stand for a second. I just want to show, this is beautiful. We have many wonderful colleagues and friends who are in the room with us today. It's a great testament, Jeremy, to you that so many people are eager to hear from you, especially in this most precarious moment. Of course, we didn't know when we scheduled this several months ago that we would be where we are right now, but I am thrilled and grateful that we get to hear your wisdom and your insight today. I imagine that, like in any room of Jews, there will be a healthy spectrum of views and perspectives. Not everyone's in lockstep with everything that we're going to hear today. And I'm also so grateful that we have built over many years a culture in which we're able to hear things that can challenge us that we don't necessarily agree with and take them in with great respect and respond with respect. And I know that we'll be able to do that today. So thank you so much for being with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to first offer some opening remarks. Then he and I will engage in conversation, and then we'll open it up to the room, assuming that there's still time, so that folks will be able to ask questions and engage in a little dialogue with us as well. Jeremy.
Terrific. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you to Janet Halbert, who is just a longtime friend, longtime supporter of J Street. Really tremendous human being. Thank you. I also just want to acknowledge your leader and your rabbi. It is just such an honor and a privilege for me to be here next to Rabbi Sharon Brous. And her voice... I know you know this in this room, but it is a national voice, right? It is a voice of conscience. It is a voice that guides us through some really dark times, through some real challenges. And I really can't think of another person in this country whose voice in our community is more spot on in helping us to navigate through these times, understanding the ethics and the morals of our people and the history and the guidance. And so I thank you very much.
Thanks.
I have the honor, because of modern day technology, to be able to listen to sermons that you give, even though I am thousands of miles away. And so much of what you are trying to help people do is very much what is at the core of J Street's approach, which is to help recognize the complexity of the issues and the need to get beyond the binary on so many of the difficult things that we face. The temptation so often is to look for the either or, to come up with what is black and what is white, what is good and what is evil, and the importance of being able to hold two truths at once, and to be able to figure out how to wind them together in a fashion that allows you to then move forward and come to solutions. I think that is very central to the way that you preach and teach. It's central to the way that J Street approaches the very, very difficult challenges of this moment. Center the and. Don't make everything either or. Look for the ways in which you can hold the two together. Approach with empathy the people with whom you have a dispute. Approach those who are contradicting and fighting with you with a open mind and an open ear to try to understand where it is that they come from and meet them where they are at. These are all central lessons that I draw from your teaching. And I hope that we apply them at J Street, and I'm just really grateful to be here. So to open up, I just thought I'd touch on three topics. I'm sure we'll dig in on all of them relatively quickly. I'll touch on Iran and Gaza and anti-Semitism, and if that's not more than enough, we can, find other things to talk about. But just, I'm sure you all, it is Shabbat. I don't know everybody's practices. Perhaps you weren't all on your phones over the course of the last few hours, but reports are that the B-2 bombers from Missouri are in the air and are headed towards the Pacific. We don't know what the coming hours and days will bring. We don't know where all of this will head, but it is a very, very fraught moment. It's a moment with enormous consequence, I think, not only for, obviously, the people of Israel, for the people of Iran, for the whole Middle East, for the United States, for Jews globally. This is an exceedingly important time. I want to acknowledge that I don't think there's anybody in this room who does not view the Iranian regime as horrific. This is a regime that abuses its own people. This is a regime that threatens the region. This is a regime that has dedicated itself to the destruction of Israel. This is a regime that is an antagonist of the United States. So we come into this, I think at least maybe there's mostly agreement in the room at least, that is the starting point. And the other pieces that I think we probably all share is deep, deep empathy for the people of Israel at this moment, who are, and most of you I'm sure have friends and family who have spent the past 8 or 9 days now racing in and out of shelters, the phones buzzing, trying to figure out what exactly is going on. People's family are abroad trying to get back. People here have family there or trying to come here. This is a very difficult moment. And so, J Street on Iran starts with an understanding of what we're up against and with a deep sense of empathy. We also recognize the tactical success of the last 8 days. It's very important to acknowledge military force. J Street's pro-peace. We're not anti the use of military force. We're not a pacifist organization. And the Israeli Defense Forces achieved some real tactical successes over the course of the last 8 days, taking out top military leaders and top scientists and disabling some of the facilities. But the question becomes, now what? And the question is, can you articulate what the goal is? Is the goal simply to destroy the facilities and to take out some of the leadership and then you're done? Is the goal to topple the regime? Is the goal to permanently, as some people believe is possible, end Iran's nuclear program? These goals have not been articulated adequately, and we believe, as J Street, that diplomacy still at this moment, even with the jets in the air, provides the pathway for assuring, again, the shared goal of all of us, that Iran never has a nuclear weapon. And the way in which one approaches that, with all that I have said, is the question on the table. And that's what I'm sure we'll discuss. We believe that there is a diplomatic agreement that can neutralize Iran's nuclear program, that can put it in a box under supervision 24/7 and ensure verifiably that Iran never gets that nuclear weapon. And to do that through an agreement, to do it through diplomacy in these last hours when there is tremendous leverage that the United States has both on Iran and on Israel, because Israel needs the United States to finish the military job. There's immense leverage on the part of the United States to help to craft that agreement. So that's a starting point for our conversation on Iran. On Gaza, as we are all watching what's happening in Iran over the course of these last 8 or 9 days, our eyes have been turned from staring nonstop at the horror of what is happening in Gaza. And it is important not to lose awareness and focus and sight of what is happening there. This is a horrific humanitarian disaster. The level of destruction, the level of hunger, the level of deprivation, the lack of health care is inhumane. And I've written about it in the context of morality, that it really raises questions for us as a people about how the Jewish people are grappling with this. We understand the threat of terror. We understand the horror of October 7th. Many of us in the room have friends, again, who died or know the families and the people still with hostages today. There's no lack of understanding of the horror of October 7th. And at the same time, the horror of what the people of Gaza are experiencing right now is something that will last within our community for the rest of our lives. And it will last in the memories of the people who do survive this in Gaza for the rest of their lives. And we need to find a way out of this as quickly as possible. 70% of Israelis want the war to end now with an agreement that ends the war and brings the hostages home. That is what 70% of Israelis want. That is what J Street wants, and the time has come for that to happen. Finally, just a word on anti-Semitism. Again, I think this is something that can unite us, no matter where we are on our politics and our views, but this rise in anti-Semitism in our community and globally is something that every single Jew is experiencing, and every single Jew that I come across is very anxious about and wants to find a way to address and to deal with. So I think we share an understanding that this is a very precarious moment and that it is one that requires our community, but also the assistance of the American government and state governments and local governments and other communities to work with together. It is something that comes at us from the right politically, and it's something that comes at us from the left. And we understand that there are threats from all sides and a lot of anger, a lot of misinformation, and some really vile and horrific acts, not just words, that are happening. The question is how to fight anti-Semitism. And here is the rub. There are people who are looking to use the fight against anti-Semitism to advance political agendas that are contrary to our own interests. When the fight against anti-Semitism is used to shut down immigration, when it is used to defund higher education, when it is used to challenge the rule of law and the First Amendment and freedom of speech, that does not help us to fight anti-Semitism. It only fans the flames and actually makes it worse. And so J Street will continue to be on the front line of holding the line where criticism of Israel is protected free speech under the First Amendment, but when it crosses the line into anti-Semitism, it is appropriately treated for what it is and dealt with by the law in the appropriate way now under current law. We don't need more laws. We need enforcement of the laws, and we need real security being provided to our community, not cut by the same administration that says that it's fighting anti-Semitism by cutting higher education funding. So those are our starting points.
Okay. That's a great start for us. And I want to say, as you're speaking, I just started to wonder what our Jewish community would look like now if 17 years ago when you launched J Street, instead of monsterizing J Street, if the established Jewish community had embraced your voice and said, there is a diversity of views and perspectives in our broad and beautiful and complex American Jewish community, and this is one of them that happens to represent the values of a lot of American Jews, and welcomed your voice into that space, how different our community would look today. So I really thank you for this very measured and I think very reasonable approach to each of these three very difficult subjects. I want to start, we'll start with Iran. And it's really confusing. And I want to just acknowledge that this is really hard. When you're watching Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz have that conversation, and you're like, I don't recognize the feelings that I'm having in my body right now. This is a confusing and hard time. If you haven't seen it, it's worth seeing it, right? So there was a J Street briefing that Rabbi Rosov and I were lucky to be a part of yesterday. I've been reading Daniel Kurtzer's words, former U.S. ambassador to Israel. What I am hearing from the people who I know and trust who are in government is that I believe that there is a kind of fantasy among many Israeli Jews right now and among many American Jews that one precise strong enough bomb from launched by the United States aircraft carrier into the particular nuclear facility in Fordo will all of a sudden change history. And it will be regime change. It will be the beginning of a new Middle East. It will be a Middle East that is thriving and free, and peace will prevail. But what I'm hearing from people in government is that that is a fantasy and not reality, that if the United States were to get involved in the war the way many Israelis wanted to right now, that actually what it will more likely lead to is massive amounts of death and destruction, including the targeting of many Israeli, Jewish, and American individuals and institutions around the world. That's an important corrective to the kind of fantastical thinking that I think some of us are holding right now. And so what I want to do is ask you, am I understanding right some of the folks who you are talking to who really have a lot of experience in government, that the fantasy version of the bunker bomber on Fordo will not actually lead, or might not lead, to an era of peace and prosperity for all, but might instead lead to an even more dangerous situation for Israelis, Jews, and Americans around the world? Is that your analysis too?
What I think's key to what you've just said is the word might. Might lead. Not might makes right, but it might lead. Nobody knows what it will lead to, right? The wisdom of the way in which policy is made appropriately is when you game out all the scenarios and you think through what are the many different possible ways that this can go. It is possible that Iran has the capacity and sleeper cells around the world to engage in terrorism against Jewish and other interests. That is a possibility. We don't know. It may or may not happen, but it needs to be in the back of people's minds. It is possible that Iran might, once hit at Fordo, decide to mine the Straits of Hormuz. And if the mining of the Straits of Hormuz prevents 1/3 of the world's oil from moving, then the world's price of oil will go way up, the economy will go way down, and there will be a whole series of consequences from that are not necessarily at the front of everybody's mind. And they have the ability to do that even if you drop a bomb on Fordo. They might use short-range missiles to attack American bases and military assets that are closer than Israel is, right? They have to use long-range ballistic missiles, which are much easier to defend against, to attack Israel, but to attack American bases and American interests at shorter range. So I walk through all these things, and that's just a few of the possible scenarios. The way that I think people think about this is like a video game, that you just have to press the button, and if you've aimed correctly, your bomb will drop at just the right place, and then, like, game over, right? Like, there's a nice little sign, the music plays, and then you go on to, the next game. But the reality is, you drop that, and then you just move to the next level of the video game, right? What is Iran going to do? Then what are we going to do? What are other actors going to do? And it's very complex, and that's what's missing from a lot of the discussion and the thinking, where people are looking for simple answers, and it's never, ever that simple.
I think one of the challenges is the wild card of what the American government's interest is and what the actions are that the Trump administration will take, and I think that he's enjoying keeping everybody in suspense right now. We don't know what he's going to do, but it seems like it's my family and many of our families whose lives are on the line in the meantime, and so I have been reading the pieces that are coming out suggesting, as you've said, that there is a diplomatic solution at this point. And there is a possibility of pulling back from full-scale regional war and from nuclear war. And so I'm really most interested in that, because I think that our investment should be in saving lives right now. And I'm compelled by your argument that there is a possible way to move through this. I'm also a little bit concerned that I'm personally holding a fantasy on the other side. So there's one fantasy, which is one very precise bunker bomber in the right place in Fordo will end the war and usher in the new day. There's another fantasy, which is what I'm holding, and tell me if this is as much an impossible fantasy as the first, which is that somehow now both Iran and Israel and the United States and the world understand how absolutely precarious this moment is, and that we could all self-destruct. And so this conflagration could lead to an end to the war in Gaza, a release of the hostages, a long-term plan for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, the 23-state solution, as you said, a full regional engagement in the transformation of the Middle East, and potentially a future of peace. Is that equally naive to believe in that fantasy of kind of the other side of war will be the answer, that diplomacy could be the answer that we've all been waiting for here, and it could lead to the transformation in the next couple of years, so that Maoz and Aziz's vision of peace by 2030 could actually happen, and that this terrible moment could be the thing that actually creates the possibility for that transformation?
So I share your vision. It is a possibility, right? It is one of the scenarios, is that this does actually end up well. There's no guarantee. I mean, I can't tell you for sure. What our argument is that's the scenario to give a chance to first. You always have the opportunity to drop the bomb. You always have the opportunity to have that B-2 bomber continue the journey and go to Fordo and drop the Moabs, the bunker buster, 30,000-pound bombs on Fordo. But once you do that, you've probably eliminated the chance for the diplomatic approach. So give diplomacy a chance now. Go as far as you can. Give it everything you've got. And right now, the leverage is at its maximum. Iran is at its weakest. Now, for those who hold a more hawkish view, when a country, your adversary, is at its weakest, that's when you go for the kill, right? That's where the hawks would come out on it. I would say when the adversary is at the weakest, this is the moment to get a deal. You have the best possible leverage. It also so happens that there's a little bit of leverage on Israel. I think I mentioned that as I started, that Israel needs the United States. If it's going to finish the military task at hand, Israel could try some form of operation on Fordo. They keep hinting at that, but if they could have done it, they would have, because you do this with surprise at the beginning. You don't wait 3 weeks and say you can't do it and then suddenly try doing it. It's obviously a plan B. It's not, maybe it's a C or D. It's not even plan B. So that's always an option. Give diplomacy the chance first. If you can't get there, if Iran is just not willing to make critical concessions, if we can't get what we need in terms of guarantees and inspections and 24/7 presence and destruction of the high intensity enrichment centrifuges, if we can't get those things, we always have that opportunity for military action.
What do you think would have happened had the original Iran deal not been upended a couple of years after it was signed? Because I remember there was massive controversy in the Jewish community, and should we support the deal or not support the deal? And we wanted to have a conversation between two nuclear non-proliferation experts and regional experts, one pro the deal, one opposed to the deal. We could not find one Middle East expert or nuclear non-proliferation expert who opposed the deal, who thought that it was better to have no deal than to have this deal. And so we ended up having a wonderful community member, very brilliant of ours, who tried to represent the other side as honestly as she could. This is Dalia Dasake. But the fact that we could not find somebody who knows and understands what's at stake, who opposed the deal, made me really wonder what was going on in our Jewish community, where everybody was taking the talking points from Benjamin Netanyahu, was saying that this deal will lead to the destruction of the state of Israel. Then a couple of years later, as you recall, the Trump administration pulled out of the deal. Where would we be now? Because I think it was 10 years. It was 2015, and then now it's 2025. It would have been 10 years without enriching uranium, or with under a certain level. Could you imagine for a moment what would have been going on had we not made that shift in policy?
Well, this is, again, one of the things that is so frustrating about this whole conversation, is that we actually know what would have been happening because we lived it for 3 years, right? We lived in a world in which there was a successful verifiable nuclear agreement in place. And during all that time, Iran was more than a year away from having the uranium necessary to even begin the process of weaponization and creating a nuclear weapon and a delivery mechanism. So we know where we would have been. We would have been at least a year away from Iran being anywhere near being able to have a nuclear weapon. And the only reason that Iran is where it is today is because we broke the deal. This is what's so frustrating. We've had the real lived experience of a world with a deal and a world without a deal. And in the world with a deal, Iran is nowhere near a nuclear weapon. In the world without a deal, Iran is X period of time much closer to having enough uranium to potentially make a weapon. I'm very careful with my words because Iran is not days away from having a nuclear weapon. Iran is days away from being able to enrich uranium to the level at which you could then potentially weaponize. That's a big difference than being days away from having a nuclear weapon. In 2002, 3, can't remember exactly when the UN testimony of Colin Powell was, but in 2002, 2003, we ended up going to war because intelligence was manufactured to make us believe that a country that we were opposed to was about to have a nuclear weapon. And when all was said and done, it turned out there was no such program, there was no such evidence, and we went to war under false pretenses. Today, no intelligence assessment from this country or other countries believes that Iran is actively seeking to create a nuclear weapon. There is one country, in particular one man, who believes that, and that's Prime Minister Netanyahu and the government of Israel. They say that they have evidence. They have not made it public. There is no way to verify it. But nobody else believes that Iran has made the decision to pursue a weapon and was enriching and weaponizing the material. And we know, going back to your question, we know where we would be today. We would have inspectors in every one of their facilities. We'd have 24/7 verification of what is going on. And instead, the inspectors are out. Iran is in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it is, on the verge of having a war. And so we have the lived experience of the world with a deal and without a deal. And I would say the world with a deal is a lot better.
All right, I just want to share, I remember in the lead up to the war in Iraq that I was really struggling because we saw this evidence that our government was showing, saying that that Iraq was building weapons of mass destruction, and I was thinking, I'm opposed to war. I want to always find ways for diplomatic response to any threat, if possible. War is a last resort. It seemed like war was being used as a first resort. But I also realized, as a Jew, I thought, if somebody could have stopped Hitler in 1933 and chose not to because they weren't certain of the threat, etc. So I remember talking to my dear friend, Reverend Ed Bacon, and I said, I'm really conflicted about this. Can you help me think about it? And he said, the only question is, do you trust the people who are making the case for war? Because if you don't, then you cannot support the war. And it was very wise, and I've been thinking about that a lot in the last several days, week and a half, but also in the last couple of years. And I think this transitions us to Gaza, which of course is a different war, but a related war. And in fact, I've heard many people say that the war between Israel and Iran right now should be called the 10-7 war, because actually it didn't start a week and a half ago. It actually started on October 7th. Other people say actually it started long before that. So I was very struck by, I'll just say to the Ed Bacon point, I think that the last year and a half of war, or at least the last year of war, has really stripped away a lot of faith that many people have in the Prime Minister and in Israel's government. We knew going into October 7th that this was the most right-wing, ultra-nationalist, messianic government in Israel's history. Now we have seen and heard from ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, and from the Prime Minister himself, saying explicitly their goal of making Gaza uninhabitable. We've heard ministers in the government talk about the use of starvation as a legitimate tool of war. Many of us, as American Jews, had gotten to the place long ago where we were utterly horrified by actions that government was taking and by this ongoing war. And this is a different war, but it's a related war, and it's the same actors that are enacting this war that are also continue to enact the war in Gaza. And so I have appreciated your attempt and Daniel Sokach's attempt and others to kind of pull these two apart and to look at the conflagration with Iran separately, but relatedly from the conflagration and ongoing war in Gaza. One of the things that I was most struck by in your writing about this was your conversation with Einat Wilf, and you, with whom you had a debate. This is a member of Knesset, and you said she maintained that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will only end when Palestinians acknowledge that they lost and get over it, and give up their claims to land and homes, and frankly, their history. And you said, having just come back from your own trip to explore your own family's Jewish roots in Vienna, you said the following: speaking only for myself, I will never get over what happened to my family 80 to 90 years ago. The anger and the sadness will never stop. And I wonder if you could just speak a little bit to the ways that there has developed a culture that has become kind of normalized or mainstream. That's I think in the language of Ehud Omer, it's an arrogant culture in which many Israelis and supporters of Israel came to believe that our history could be a driver for us for all eternity, but Palestinians can get over it and forget about it and move on. That we have a legitimate right to return to our dream from 2,000 years ago, but they do not have a legitimate right to their homes. Can you talk about this a little bit, about the way that arrogance and humility are playing into both I don't know I keep calling it a conflagration, but it really is. The skies are on fire with Iran, but also the ongoing devastation in Gaza.
So I think that the word that I come to is the word I used in discussing what I learned from you, which is empathy. It is absolutely impossible to unravel conflicts if one can't muster empathy for the other side. I think the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the most tragic because there are two sides that both consider themselves to be the world's greatest victim, who really do believe that everything that could possibly have been done by the world to them has been done to them, and therefore they have, a certain right to pursue their vision to the exclusion of all others. And if one doesn't have the ability on the Palestinian side not to hear, and it goes for like Palestinian supporter students on our college campuses, right? If you don't have the ability to hear the history of the Jewish people and the connectivity of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, and to understand that, this European colonial settler charge is not relevant to the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, then you're never going to be able to think about how to get to a solution. But similarly for the Jewish people, having been oppressed, having been kicked out of so many lands, having been the minority population in so many places over our history, how is it that we can't understand how the Palestinian people feel? And when my sister and my great-grandparents and grandparents and John Rosoff's great-grandparents got to Petach Tikva in 1882, they were 10% of the population of Palestine, according to the Ottoman census at that point. There were 90% other people there, right? And now the sons, daughters, grandkids, great-grandkids of those people are in Gaza or in Syria or in Lebanon or, somewhere else. And how is it that we can't understand that? That there's something that has to be acknowledged on our part about their loss and suffering. We are not the only people who have experienced that. And so when My other cousin who is here, Judy, and I were in Vienna just 2 to 3 weeks ago, walking the streets of our parents and grandparents and looking at the memorial plaques in front of the homes where our relatives were carted off to the camps. To understand this feeling of loss and to understand what other people are feeling in the same situation, that is the key to this, is empathy and being able to realize that there are two truths here, not only one. And if you insist that yours is the only truth, if you insist the other side must give up their truth, which is what Einat says and what many people say in these debates, we will never have peace. Because people will never give up their truth, right? They will never give up their history. They will never give up their loss. And the question is, how do you live with that history? How do you live going forward? And that's where we find solutions rather than continued conflict.
I remember when one of my kids was playing basketball in 8th grade, and they played another team that was just terrible. And my kid's team just kept scoring and scoring and scoring, and the other poor team was just getting wiped out. And when it got to 42, 44, 46, I was getting increasingly uncomfortable, and I started just rooting for the other team because I thought it was really not a good story. I thought these kids are going to go home and just
I was
be
probably
devastated.
coaching the other team. That's my history is that those are my teams.
And then finally, at some point, one of the kids from the other team made a basket, and I just jumped up and was screaming and cheering. And I got in so much trouble from my kid. And I think I just wanted them to have a win, Anyway, I think that a lot of people look at geopolitics like they look at sports, where it's really not, you can't love the Eagles and the Cowboys. Am I right? Is that right? You can't. All I care about is that nobody gets injured, but I'm not a sports fan. The sports fans, you can't love this and this unless it's an all-star game or something, which I don't understand, but you'll tell me about later. I think that people look at geopolitics the way that we look at sports, where it has to be this or this. You have to be pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. And part of what's so challenging about your voice, and I think part of what's so challenging about the space that we try to hold in our community, is that we're talking about human life. We're not talking about sports. We're talking about humanity. And you not only can you, but you must hold multiple realities at once. And human suffering and human sorrow is human suffering and human sorrow, whether the bereaved parent is Palestinian or Israeli or Iranian. And I think part of what we have to do is break out of a kind of athletic mindset and engage in a different way. We have very capacious hearts, but we're trained in narrowing our hearts. And honestly, it's matching the kind of the narrowing of our political discourse here, right? We have a team. We are good guys. The other team are bad guys. And I think we have to grow more expansive and more thoughtful. And I just want to share with you, and this will be my last question before I open it up for everybody, because I'm sure you have lots of thoughts and questions, but there's a Gemara that I think about a lot when I think about you, Jeremy, and I gave this sermon many, many years ago about you. I don't know if you ever heard it. But it's a Gemara about Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish he's an outsider. He's kind of an eternal outsider. He comes from a different background than the other rabbis. He goes through a conversion process, if you recall, in the story with Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Anyway, one day, Reish Lakish is outside, and he sees a couple of rabbis walking down the street, and they are on their way to Asiyah, where they're going to intercalate the calendar. And he's really curious because he's never experienced this before, and he asks them, "Can I walk with you?" And they say, "Sure." So now there are 3 rabbis walking down the street on their way to Asiyah to do this important halachic business, important Jewish communal business. But Reish Lakish thinks differently from the other rabbis, and he keeps seeing things that concern him along the way and asking questions about it, like, isn't it the Shemitah year, the 7th year, when the land's supposed to lie fallow? Why is that guy plowing? And at first, they're kind of charmed by his questions, and at some point, they're downright annoyed. And by the time they get to Asiyah, they whisper to each other, there's no way we're letting this guy in the room where this important business is happening. And so they climb up to the attic. It's like a tree house, and they go up the ladder. This is in the Talmud. And they say to Reish Lakish, you wait downstairs for just a minute. We're going to make sure it's safe to go upstairs. And then they pull the ladder away. So he can't go upstairs so they can do their important Jewish communal business without this gadfly kind of bugging them with all of these questions, because he's trained to see the world differently. And you know what? They get to do their business and nobody bothers them and they keep plowing ahead, but nobody knows those rabbis' names. We know Reish Lakish's name because he's the one who asked the questions. He's the one that challenged and that kind of problematized again and again. And you think, what would have happened to that halachic process if they had made the space to have this questioner who just legitimately wanted to understand more deeply? And I've always thought of you like that. And I think of Daniel Sokach and Jill Jacobs. And, we have really strong, wonderful leaders in our Jewish community who often are kind of marginalized by the establishment, by the mainstream, because your questions are annoying, right? Nobody wants to be told to think capaciously when our team needs to win. It's Eagles all the way. And actually, what we need in order to have that peaceful, thriving, just future in Israel, like here in the United States, is to stretch open the boundaries. And what do we lose when we push Reish Lakish outside and say, sorry, the ladder's gone. There's no way for you into the established spaces now. So I really want to thank you. I want to say that I appreciate your voice. I want to say that, and I don't always agree with you, Jeremy, by the way. You know that. And I'm sure that you hear me say things that bug you too. Sometimes I love that. But I appreciate you. I appreciate that you, like Reish Lakish, are always going to ask the hard questions. And you're always going to say, really, is this the only answer? Is the bombing of Fordo the only? I know it would feel really good for a second to know that that nuclear facility that could threaten our very existence and my family's existence and yours, to think that it's just off the map for a second. But what are the unintended outcomes? What could be the consequences of this? What other paths are there? And in a world where there's only one path, and that path is right, and everyone else is a heretic or a traitor or, an existential threat, I deeply, deeply appreciate you and the way that you look at the world and the way that you challenge our Jewish community to think more deeply about the decisions that we're making and where we put our support and what it means to think and lead with moral leadership in this time. So I really thank you for taking that kind of outsider view again and again and again. I think it's actually made our Jewish community stronger. I wish that it had the impact from the center and not only from the outside. Bring the marginal voice into the center and just imagine if we could ripple outward instead of, rippling in from the outside. So I really want to thank you for that. I want to open up for some questions. I'm going to remind everyone how a question works, which is it is a short sentence that ends with a question mark, because I know we all have our sermons here, and I just gave you a few of mine. Sorry, you came to hear Jeremy, but I want to make sure that we're inviting Jeremy to respond with his depth of thinking, and we'll start with Michael Ellenberg. I don't know who has the. Thank you, Ben. I see Michael's hand is up here. I'm just going to invite you to please stand, say your name, and then engage.
Hi, Michael Ellenberg. Curious, just in the discussion about polarization and if J Street was founded, I'll try not to do a speech, but like if AIPAC had become reflexively one view about Israel politics all the time, how do you approach J Street not becoming similar? One view about Israel and these issues all the time? And curious, over the 17 years, on any of these topics we just discussed, how have your views evolved? What have you learned, maybe from the campus stuff in particular I'm curious about, that's changed your view from before, or maybe it hasn't? But I think if we're such an important discussion around not becoming reflexively one way, it's easy for J Street, if it's the alternative, to be that also. And curious where your views have changed and evolved in this time.
Thank you, Michael.
So great question, and I do hope that we are not reflexive. I think that the philosophy that we bring has some basic principles that haven't changed. I think the principle that Israel can, in the long run, only be secure, democratic, and Jewish in nature if there's a state of Palestine next to it, that continues to be a core principle. The idea that in order to be pro-Israel, you don't have to always agree with the government is a core principle, and that hasn't shifted. So I think the basic principles on which we were founded 17 years ago, support for Israel, support for democracy, diplomacy, haven't shifted. The world has changed enormously. I think when we started and we were these radical outsiders and, sort of viewed as the bomb throwers from the left or something, the whole political spectrum has shifted so dramatically and polarized so extremely that I think our positioning has changed dramatically in these years. So, for instance, I would say 10 years ago, in talking about anti-Semitism, I would have said the overwhelming bulk of anti-Semitism that we face is coming from the right. Who's walking into synagogues with guns, etc. There's a few annoying tweets on the left, but by and large, the real problem is on the right. And I think that's shifted, particularly in the last couple of years. But now we have some very, very serious problems on our left with anti-Semitism as well. And I'm the first to acknowledge that, and it wasn't the way that I saw the world 10 years ago, and I see it differently today. But I don't think that we are reflexive in just simply, holding on to some criticism that we must criticize Israel about. We are trying to judge everything by, does it advance Israel's security? Does it keep the state democratic? And does it keep a Jewish nature to the state?
I'm going to add one other way that I think you've changed. I read the piece. You mentioned the 23-state solution, Janet, when you introduced, so this is one thing that
that's a great one. I mean, it's a great reminder that the shift. We do not talk about a two-state solution anymore. When we started, I think if you said the word J Street, the first thing out of people's minds would have been a two-state solution. It's no longer the way in which to reach people, right? And you can't think about the solution to this conflict just in the Israeli-Palestinian context. You have to think regionally. And the Arab world is ready for a very broad regional comprehensive solution. And so we now talk about the 23-state solution, and that's replaced our thinking from 15 years ago about a two-state solution.
It's interesting in both of those cases, Michael, it seems like initially J Street and Jeremy, your perspective was more narrow. The anti-Semitism that existed came from this camp, and now it's expanded to say, let's talk about anti-Semitism. And, it's about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and now it's about creating a regional comprehensive peace. And so it seems like the trajectory of J Street's thinking is expanding.
Broadening.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know who has them. I saw you next. Okay.
So my question I'm Claire Gorfinkel, I live in Pasadena. My question for both of you is if you're familiar with Peter Beinart's new book called Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. And my question for you is there anything in it that you disagree with?
I don't know if Peter Beinart himself could say that there's anything in there that he doesn't disagree with. But yeah, you want to go ahead and answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think Peter is a really, really important moral voice of our generation, and I deeply appreciate the lens through which he looks at things. What I disagree with him is not really what the focus of the book was. I disagree with him on his prescription of what to do about all of this. That's where I disagree. His moral take on things, I don't have anything to disagree with. I think that he is sometimes a little overly critical of our own community and not willing enough to acknowledge some of the things happening on the other side, but I deeply appreciate the moral perspective that he brings.
I also, Peter has a piece in today's New York Times, if you haven't seen it yet, hopefully you will later, and he's a dear friend, and we've brought him to IKAR before, and I love being challenged by Peter's thinking. I don't always agree with Peter, and so I do appreciate both his moral analysis and his voice. And I do want to share one thing that Peter said at some point in the last year and a half that actually helped me understand some of what's going on in our Jewish community, which is he said that Jews who engage in the work of liberation of the Palestinian people have to go through a kind of divorce of their own family. In many ways, their families reject them. And so there's a break and a real loss because many Jewish families and Jewish community in many ways does not want to hear their family members talking about Palestinian liberation. And so they've already lost one family. So then when that movement ends up doing things that are really harmful to us as Jews, it's hard to break from that family because that's now the only family they have. And I thought that was a really interesting and very empathic way of helping us understand some of what's breaking in our own Jewish community intergenerationally and kind of across the board. So I'm very grateful for Peter's voice. I think it's an important voice that should be reckoned with in our community.
I know we're trying to get a lot of questions, and I apologize. I just had to add one more thought to this, which is when it comes to younger voices, and take a look around the room, just making a comment, as we think about our kids and our grandkids, and they challenge us, and the institutions of the Jewish community say, where did we go wrong? I find that so distressing. Because what we have done is we have raised a generation of kids with a really, really strong sense of justice and a really strong moral compass that is trying to process what is happening in Gaza. And I say, where did we go right? We did the right thing in instilling these values and instilling these morals. Perhaps we missed a little on some of the history. Perhaps we didn't do so great a job at, explaining the complexities and the nuances. But please encourage the institutions of the Jewish community not to turn against. The kids may feel that they're divorcing their family, but the community is divorcing them. And I don't think that we should allow that to happen. We have to welcome them in.
Brian?
To begin with a question, do you think there is any prospect that the combination of Jewish American ethics and Jewish American interests can soon move what we're hearing today from the margins to the mainstream of the Jewish American discourse? And what could it take to accelerate that?
Thank you, Brian.
So I think that there's a question about whether you mean the discourse of the 6 to 7 million Jewish Americans or the discourse in the institutions that purport to represent them. And I don't know that those institutions, which are largely dominated by a small number of donors who have politics that are different from the community as a whole, I don't know that you can move them. I think that one of the issues that we have right now is we have a set of institutions that I've been now watching for 20 or 30 years, unable to move one iota in the way that they approach this. And just everything that Israel does, everything Netanyahu does, you have to just fall in line and follow him. It's kind of the way MAGA is with Trump, right? I mean, you have to follow the leader. And until we see institutions rise up that will represent us, represent the broader majority, and really challenge for the microphone. I don't think that it's just going to happen from within, is the way that I've come to see it after 20 or 30 years of watching.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. Oh, wow.
Take a couple.
Okay. So Adam, I see your forehead. And then I haven't taken anyone from this side of the room, so I feel, I'll come to John. Oh. Can I just see who else? I want to close us in a reasonable time so everyone can nap. So, okay,
Sure.
Go ahead, Adam.
All right, Adam Morgelees. So, quick question, and I want to be clear. I'm not advocating, so people don't yell at Melissa for what I'm about to say. But you made a comment about that we can always bomb, right? Like in service of kind of diplomacy, we always reserve the right, which is of course true. But isn't part of what's happening right now, and how do you think about this, is that in the aftermath of October 7, Iran and its proxies have come to look very much like a paper tiger that we didn't anticipate. So the question is, when you're thinking about diplomacy, and you said you're not a pacifist, how do you think about that strategic question of, is this the moment that we can do this without imperiling more of our people because we know Iran is weak versus the opportunity for diplomacy?
Well, I do think that's precisely the calculation. I mean, I think that one of the reasons why we are where we are today is because Iran is at the weakest that it has been, and it's been exposed as weak by some of the tactical successes that the Israeli Defense Forces have had, taking out Hezbollah as a factor in Lebanon, and that in having the knock-on effect of Assad then being overthrown. The reason why Israel began the planning for this operation last fall, by the way, that's an important fact to know, that this didn't just start last week because there was suddenly new information. The planning for this operation started last fall because Syrian airspace opened up. And Israeli jets could get straight to Iran across Syrian airspace in a way that they couldn't prior to Assad's fall. And so the weakness of Iran's proxies and the paper tiger nature of its defenses, which were shredded, right, because it launched a ballistic missile attack last April against Israel and again in the fall. And in retaliation for those two missile attacks, Israel took out its air defenses. So Iran was extremely weak. But that's precisely the moment to strike for a political diplomatic deal. The actual end of the Iranian nuclear program and its containment and international inspection has to come through a diplomatic agreement. If one bombs and uses only military force, when the dust settles, they'll build it even more deeply underground. And they have the knowledge, and they will continue to have stores of uranium, and they will get back where they were. But there won't be any international inspectors, and there won't be any regime of sanctions that's waiting to snap back in October the way it is right now, thanks to the JCPOA. So I think this is the moment to get the best possible diplomatic deal. And if you don't give that a chance and you go straight to the military, I think 3 to 5 years from now, we'll be in worse shape than we are today.
Okay, we're going to take one more question from somewhere in the... Yes, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for being here today. This was very insightful. My name is Jonathan Silverman. Recently, there was an article on how Zionism has become the new Judaism, and I was wondering if you could reflect on the idea that Israel has become a pariah state as Zionism has advanced a more, let's say, right-wing agenda that's kind of overtaking the idea of Judaism in the community. Thank you.
Well, there's a lot of layers to that question. It's a really good question. I'm sure you probably have some thoughts on this too. Jewish identity, to me, is so much deeper than national identity. We had, for 1,800 years of dispersion, an identity that was forged through our teachings, through our learning, through what we believed, our practice, our customs, and Jewish identity, to me, is so much deeper and stronger than nationalism around the state of Israel. I am concerned that over the course of recent decades that more and more Jewish identity in this country has come to be taken over by affiliation with the state of Israel, almost at times overtaking some of the moral and ethical teachings and the deeper meaning of what it means to be Jewish. I'm curious to hear your take on this, but I worry about the idea that our Jewish identity in this country is primarily related to Zionism and to the state of Israel. Another layer of your question I just want to call out is, what does Zionism mean? And I really hold to a very narrow definition of Zionism, that Zionism is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in a state of their own in the land of Israel. Period, end of story. I don't see it as having content. Our father fought with socialist Zionists, over what exactly Zionism means, right? Revisionist, socialist, whatever, cultural, that you can have arguments about what it means, but at its essence, I keep it simple, and I keep it to that narrow definition. And so I don't think that associating with that is causing agita for Jewish Americans. What I think is causing agita for Jewish Americans is that we have made Zionism be support for whatever the government of Israel is doing, and then we get held accountable for the actions of people like Bibi Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, and I do not feel any need to be held accountable for the actions of those people.
Well, I want to close by just going back to your answer to Michael's initial question, which, I have been really compelled by this image that I keep talking about over the last few months of like dropping a sea anchor on our values. So there's like giant waves that are coming to swallow us up from both sides. And I'm aware that that's not how the ocean works, but that's how I'm envisioning it. But what do you do so that you're not subsumed by these waves and you don't find yourself running to escape one wave into the embrace of something else that's equally problematic? And I think in this time of growing extremism, that it's really essential that we really drop an anchor in our core values. And so I want to close with a prayer. That in this time of so much darkness, fear, uncertainty, and upheaval, that somehow born from this will be a new era, a new chapter. I pray for the return of the hostages. That the more this story is backburnered, the more worried I am for these people who were still alive as of a couple of weeks ago, and God willing, those who are still alive will make it home to their families. They will all, those who have died will be able to be buried with dignity. I pray for a surge of humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza, that they should be supported in the rebuilding of their homes and the building of a better society there and a safer society for them. I pray that in Iran, out of all of this fire and all of this pain, will grow the possibility for freedom, for peace, and for human dignity. And I really pray that our Jewish community can find a way to continue to hold hope, even in the darkest hours here, because I believe that this is only a chapter. It's a hard chapter, but I know that there will be another one after this. And I think with our strong spiritual will and with our moral center, we can help drive through this moment of history to come to real human flourishing on the other side. So I really thank you and bless you, Jeremy. Thank you to all the folks from J Street who helped put this together. We're going to have David Bubis come and close us with just a word of thanks, and then we'll wrap up for today.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm David Bubis. I'm a 20-year member now of IKAR and a longtime supporter of J Street, and I have the privilege of being the LA chapter co-chair of J Street, along with my colleague Carrie Hausner, who's right there. Thank you, Carrie. I want to thank two incredible voices in our lives, in our Jewish lives. I kind of was imagining this is like Bob Dylan sat down with Joni Mitchell and had a conversation. I mean, this is like, you're my giants, and I appreciate both of you very, very much. A special shout out to our IKAR and our J Street staff for putting today together. Thank you. So on your tables, there is a card with a QR code on it. Shabbat, we're not going to sign up anything, but if you are interested in getting active and involved in J Street, please, there are upcoming J Street events and conferences, resources, current events. Janet mentioned earlier, in March, we're having our, is it March or April? March is that we're having our national conference. Encourage all of you to come to DC, future Zoom calls and conferences, et cetera. How to get more involved in our political advocacy and lobbying work with Congress. There's also a great resource. Every day I start my day reading the J Street newsfeed. It is free. I get updates on everything that's going on in Israel and in the United States pertaining to Israel, and it's a really great resource. If you can sign up using this QR code. If you have any further questions about involvement, please see me or Janet or Carrie or anybody wearing one of these executive committee name tags. We welcome your involvement very, very much, and we need you. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Chloe Miller for sharing her bat mitzvah Shabbat with this beautiful gathering. Grateful to all of you for being with us. Thank you.